Welcome to the Blue Mouse Knits. I am just about to put out a free, very lengthy tutorial on how to knit this drop shoulder cardigan. So the video comes out tomorrow, and this video is all about the materials and the information to get you started, and then you can look forward to the full lengthy tutorial tomorrow. So for starters, this cardigan is worked flat in pieces, and it is knit from the bottom up. So you knit each of the front panels and then the back panel, then you sew them together on the shoulders, pick up and knit the sleeves, and then you sew the sleeves and the side of the cardigan closed. The pattern will walk you through absolutely every step, including all of the seaming, the knitting, the binding off, the blocking, the weaving in your ends, everything. This video here goes over the materials, how to choose your size, and all of the abbreviations and things mentioned in the pattern. So this pattern comes with 6 sizes. All of the information is written down below for every different measurement area, and there are 2 different lengths for the pattern. So this is the short length. It's not really short, it's just shorter than the other version. So you can think of it like a regular length. I am wearing high-waisted pants, but for me this is about where my hips are, so they're just a tiny bit longer than my hips, and the other version is longer. And it is knit using worsted weight yarn, which is sometimes called medium number 4, or Aran weight yarn. You can find the exact yardage written down below as well. So this pattern has a gauge, and if you've never worked a knitting pattern before, a gauge is just a way to tell if you are going to end up with the same size that's written in the pattern. So we knit what's called a gauge swatch, and I have several videos on it down below. A gauge swatch is just a way to tell that you and I are knitting the same size stitches so that when you follow the pattern, you get the size that you are intending on knitting. But we're going to work the gauge swatch in stockinette flat. On one row you knit and on the other row you purl. So let's say that your odd number rows are all knit across and your even rows are all purl across. The number of the row doesn't really matter as long as you're alternating knitting and purling, which I have lots of videos on how to work those stitches and how to learn how to cast on, how to learn how to knit. Everything else will be linked down below as well. So the gauge for the pattern is 13.5 stitches by 21 rows equals 4 inches. So when I knit a gauge swatch, I like to cast down at least twice the number of stitches in the gauge. So for this example, I would knit at least 27, if not 30 stitches just to be safe. So cast on 30 stitches and then you're going to work in stockinette for, the gauge says 21 rows, but I would knit at least 30, if not 40 rows. Now that may sound like a lot, but this is a great way to tell that your sweater is going to be the size that you want it to. Now at the end of your gauge swatch, when you finish it, you want to block it. So blocking it just means that you soak it in water for a little bit, squeeze out the excess water, and then lay it out to dry. You don't use any heat or anything to dry it faster. Just lay it out on like a dry towel and kind of make sure the stitches look a little bit straight. And then after it dries, you can measure it. So I have a video on how I measure my gauge and everything like that listed down below, but that's the basic gist of it, that if you're knitting a gauge swatch, I like to double the amount of stitches that the gauge says. That way it gives you a buffer, because usually at the edge of your gauge swatch, the stitches are a little bit scrunched. So this way it gives you a perfect middle section of your swatch that's easy to measure and it is accurate. If you're really, really close to this gauge, which is slightly off by like 1 or 2 stitches in 4 inches, that's probably something that you can stretch out with pins when you're finishing your whole project. And usually my full projects end up being a little bit more stretchy than my gauge swatch. So if you're just barely off, that's okay. Now, if you're really, really off, let's say that you are getting like 10 stitches per 4 inches instead of 13.5, then you will want to go down a needle size because your stitches are too big and you need smaller stitches to get more. If you don't have enough stitches, go down a needle size. If you have too many stitches, go up a needle size because your stitches are too small and you need to make them bigger. You will need 2 sets of needles for this pattern, a set of gauge needles and a set of rib needles. Now, technically this pattern is knit flat, so you can use straight needles, but I do recommend circular needles because you'll have a lot of stitches to manage, and I just find it a lot easier on circulars, but that's totally up to your preference. So gauge needles just refer to the set of needles that you match gauge with. Essentially, you have a main set of needles that you use for your whole project, and then you have kind of an extra set of needles that you use to work the ribbed edge. Ribbing tends to flare, so we like to use a needle that's a couple sizes smaller than our main needle when we're working ribbing. It's just kind of an industry standard. So typically when you're working a pattern, you have a main set of needles, which is called your gauge needles, and then you have a rib set of needles. For a gauge set of needles, I recommend a US 10, which is a 6mm, and I like a 32-inch circular needle, but you can use straight needles if you prefer. And then for the rib needles, I suggest going down 1 to 2 sizes smaller. So I used a US 8, which is a 5mm. in the exact same cord length. You also need a yarn needle, which can be called a tapestry needle, but a stitch marker and crochet hook are also optional, but I suggest that you use them as well. If you're going to follow my exact instructions on how to block your cardigan, which is where you wash it and lay it out so that it's the exact size that you want, you'll need like a measuring tape, some pins, some blocking mats or a towel, and some kind of bowl or bin to wash your project in. All the details for that will be in the full video, but the main materials that you need to work with are yarn, 2 sets of needles, and a tapestry needle. The pattern uses some terms that might be confusing to you if you are a beginner knitter. So here I have an abbreviations list, but also a list of common terms that you might not know. So the pattern will refer to stockinette, rib, and garter. These are all different kind of stitch patterns. So stockinette is where you knit on one side and then you purl on the other. And then garter is where you knit on both sides of the project. And then ribbing is where you are alternating a knit and purl. The pattern will list it out exactly how you're supposed to knit it, but when I refer to these stitch patterns, this can just give you an idea of what I'm talking about. The pattern will also refer to a right side and a wrong side of your pattern. Each row will be listed as a right side row or a wrong side row. So a right side row just refers to the side of your project that will be showed outward. This side right here is your right side of your project, and then the inside of my cardigan is the wrong side. So right side just refers to the pretty side that you will see on the outside of your project, and the wrong side refers to the less pretty side that will be on the inside of your project. And then you have your standard abbreviations here, which I've written all out. It's almost exclusively knitting and purling, but we will do a little bit of binding off, and we will use 2 different kinds of knit decreases, but I will show you exactly how to work those, and I have more extensive videos if you need a more slowed down version. So this pattern is written for 6 sizes, and it is written in this kind of sizing structure. So if you've never seen something like this before, I'll quickly explain how to read it. So everything is read left to right, goes in sequence. So if you have the first size, then yours will always be first in the sequence no matter what the instruction is. If you're working size 3, you will always be the 3rd instruction in the sequence. So you'll count 1, 2, 3. So just keep your size in mind when you're knitting the pattern. This cardigan is designed to be worn a little bit oversized, not a ton. You can choose whatever size you want, but I recommend that you choose somewhere between 4 and 10 inches of positive ease. Positive ease just means how much bigger it is than your actual measurements. So if you have a 40-inch bust, for example, and you want 4 inches of ease, you're looking for a size close to 44 inches in bust circumference. It really depends on how oversized and big you like your cardigans. I would say at the bare minimum, do 2 inches of ease. You don't want to go any smaller than that. Just go ahead and choose a bust measurement that is between 4 and 10 inches larger than your actual body measurements. So here I have written all of the bust measurements on screen. There are 6 sizes, and the cardigan is worn open. So as you can see in the front here, you don't add a button band or anything like that. It's worn open in the front, and if it's big enough, you can always, just fold it over in the front if you want, or just leave it open. So I'm not going to put every single measurement on screen, but all the other information will be written down below for the measurements. There's meant to be enough positive ease in the upper arm that it's not tight on you, but you may want to check the upper arm circumference to make sure that there'll be at least a little bit of positive ease when you're wearing it. And if not, you may want to size up to the next size so that the arm and the bust fit comfortably. That's pretty much everything that you need to know when going into this pattern. The full video and free pattern will be dropping tomorrow, so I hope you guys will give it a look, and I hope you'll knit a cardigan along with me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm really excited to release this video tomorrow, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can always find my knitting patterns on Etsy and Ravelry, or you can just like the video and subscribe. That also helps the channel out a ton. Thank you guys so much. I will see you tomorrow.